Podcast Path of Truth, latest developments. Iran-US peace talks in Islamabad. Warning, content warning. This podcast covers sensitive topics of war and diplomacy. Welcome to Path of Truth. Today is April 11th, 2026. We have very important news about the Iran-US war. After 40 days of war, both sides have sat down at the negotiating table, talks that could change the fate of the entire region. On Tuesday, April 8th, 2026, news broke that made the world hold its breath. Iran and the United States, with Pakistan as mediator, reached an agreement for a 2-week ceasefire. After 40 days of war, for the first time, the sound of silence echoed in the region. Pakistan, which had been acting as a mediator between Iran and the US for weeks, managed to achieve this diplomatic victory. Donald Trump, the US president, said his conversations with senior Pakistani officials were the main reason for this pause in the war. But this ceasefire, as Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif warned, is just the beginning of a more difficult phase. He said, "A temporary ceasefire has been announced, but now a more difficult phase lies ahead. The phase of reaching a permanent ceasefire, resolving complex issues through negotiation. A make or break phase." The Pakistani capital, Islamabad, has a different atmosphere these days. Streets are quiet, armed forces are present everywhere, and the Serena Hotel, the likely venue for the talks, has been evacuated. The U.S. delegation, led by JD Vance, the U.S. Vice President, has arrived in Islamabad. Alongside him are Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy, and Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law and senior advisor. This is the highest level of U.S. contact with Iran since the 2015 nuclear deal. The Iranian delegation, led by Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, and Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister, has also arrived in Islamabad. Ghalibaf, himself a former commander of the IRGC, said cautiously, "We have good intentions, but we do not trust. Our experience negotiating with the Americans has always been met with failure and unfulfilled promises." The talks are being held indirectly. The Iranian and U.S. delegations sit in separate rooms, and Pakistani officials shuttle proposals between them. This is the same format used in previous talks in Oman. Iran has come to the negotiating table with preconditions. Tehran's most important condition is a ceasefire in Lebanon. Iran insists that Israel's attacks on Hezbollah and Lebanese infrastructure are part of the same war and must stop. Masoud Pezeshkian, the Iranian president, warned on X that continued Israeli attacks would make the talks meaningless. Iran's second condition is the release of its frozen assets. Assets that have been under U.S. sanctions for years, and Iran wants them released. Additionally, Iran has presented a 10-point plan. The most important clauses of this plan are control over the Strait of Hormuz and collecting tolls from passing ships, withdrawal of U.S. forces from regional bases, recognition of Iran's right to enrich uranium, and stopping Israeli attacks on Hezbollah in Lebanon. Iran has also demanded war reparations. On the other side of the table, the U.S. has entered negotiations with firm positions. Trump told the New York Post that the outcome of the talks would be known within about 24 hours and threatened that if the talks fail, U.S. warships with the best ammunition in the world will be reloaded to resume strikes on Iran. The U.S.'s most important demand is Iran's nuclear disarmament. Trump said a good deal with Iran means no nuclear weapons, and that is 99% of the deal. The second main U.S. demand is the full reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Trump has promised to open the strait with or without Iran. The U.S. has presented a 15-point plan. This plan includes severe restrictions on Iran's nuclear program, restrictions on its missile program, and freedom of passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Reports also suggest the U.S. wants Iran to hand over about 450 kilograms of enriched uranium. The biggest obstacle to an agreement is the issue of Lebanon. Israel, just hours after the 2-week ceasefire was announced, launched widespread attacks on Lebanon. On the first full day of the ceasefire, Israeli attacks left over 350 dead in Lebanon. Israel has declared it will never agree to a ceasefire with Hezbollah. Yehiel Leiter, Israel's ambassador to the U.S., said, Israel has refrained from discussing a ceasefire with the terrorist organization Hezbollah, which continues to attack Israel and is the main obstacle to peace between the two countries. But the U.S. has a softer tone on this issue. JD Vance, the U.S. Vice President, said there may be a legitimate misunderstanding about Lebanon's inclusion in the ceasefire. This gap between U.S. and Israeli positions could be an opportunity for diplomacy. How did Pakistan achieve this position? Pakistan has strong and extensive relations with all parties. Qasim Munir, the army chief, have established close ties with Trump and were invited to the White House last year. This extensive network of relations has placed Pakistan in a unique position to mediate between Iran and the U.S. Will these talks lead to a lasting agreement? No one knows. Trump says he is very optimistic and that Iranian leaders are much more reasonable in private conversations. But on the other hand, Ghalibaf, the Speaker of the Iranian parliament, has said that talks will only continue if Iran's preconditions are met, a ceasefire in Lebanon and the release of Iran's assets. Even if the talks are successful, officials expect this meeting to be only the first round of a series of negotiations to reach a long-term agreement. On Path of Truth, we will continue to follow these developments. The Islamabad talks are a major test for diplomacy in the region. The Strait of Hormuz, Lebanon, Iran's nuclear program, all are on the table. 40 days of war, thousands dead, and an economy in shock. Now the ball is in diplomacy's court. I invite you to stay with us. If this podcast has been enlightening, please share it with your friends. Path of Truth continues with your support. Until the next episode, stay healthy and seek the truth. Sources: SBS News, report on Islamabad talks and Pakistan's mediation role. Bangladesh Samad Sangstha, BSS, latest developments and presence of Iranian and U.S. delegations in Islamabad. Gulf News, analysis of talks and challenges ahead. Hindustan Times, security and logistical details of Islamabad talks. Xinhua News, Trump statements on talks and threat to escalate war. For the latest updates, follow Path of Truth.